It's no secret that the Chaos Dwarfs are likely the first race pack DLC for Total War Warhammer 3. You've seen their names splashed across loading screens and cities, data mined advisor dialogue, and undoubtedly noticed the copious Dawizar-shaped hole in the Darklands. Also, the endless speculation videos from content creators, but divining what CA will do next is like reading tea leaves, and Americans are bad at that anyway, so instead, let's talk about who the Chaos Dwarfs are, why they're awesome, and then lay out what legendary lords, units, and mechanics would make for a cool DLC. Videos like this let the developers know our desires and expectations, and together we can make Chaos Dwarfs the coolest faction yet. So if you hear something you like or think of a better idea, make sure to comment below. You'll find chapters across the bottom if you want to skip around. So who are the Chaos Dwarfs? Well, it's a bit more difficult to answer than you might expect, as there's a 15-year gap in their lore. Originally, they drew on a lot of Babylonian imagery, and that's where you get all these tall hats and ziggurats. But the Chaos Dwarfs got something of a reboot in the Tamarkan Throne of Chaos army list, which moved them to a much more grim, dark steampunk style. And that's one of the reasons you see so many different interpretations of what the Chaos Dwarfs roster could look like in speculation videos. But there's more to these evil stunties than tall hats, Red Bull jokes, and Thomas the Tank Engine memes. Known as the Dawizar in Khazalid, or the Uzkuldrathzar in their own tongue, Chaos Dwarfs are the corrupted, evil kin of the dwarfs who rule an empire in the heat-blasted Darklands to the east of the Old World. There they worship Hashut, the Father of Darkness, who is a bull-shaped minor god, and sit and smolder, content to bide their time until they can bring the world under their dominion. Abandoned by their kin and ancestor gods on the wrong side of the World's Edge Mountains, the Chaos Dwarfs cried into the darkness for help, and it answered back. Succumbing to the warping chaos energies of Hashut, they gradually became a cynical mockery of everything Dawi. Chaos Dwarfs are paler than their cousins and prefer to dress in dark armor, while others mutated into a fusion of dwarf and bull through Hashut's blessings. Everything in their society is based around the worship of Hashut, from sacrificial offerings to even how the armies are led. It's the priestly class, the sorcerer prophets of Hashut, who rule the entirety of their society. If you want a shorthand of how this works, the more important you are, the taller your hat is. To build this new empire, the dwarfs enslaved the local goblins, orcs, and hobgoblins, then forced them to fight in their armies and build their cities. They even experimented on them to create the ultimate warriors, Black Orcs, of which Grimgor Ironhide is the best known, but they rose up like a green Spartacus, or Sportacus to be lore accurate, and rebelled against them. Now only the hobgoblins remain under Chaos Dwarf control. Now, let's think about all that lore-like devs. How can that be translated to Total War gameplay? Taking and utilizing slaves is core to Chaos Dwarf society. It should be a mechanic, and since the Dark Elves did something similar in Warhammer 2, there's already code to build on. They build their cities, keep their forges lit, either with coal or with their bodies if all else fails, and should be an intrinsic resource to the growth and prosperity of the Chaos Dwarf Empire. The other hallmark feature of the Chaos Dwarfs is their technological innovation. They have rail networks connecting their various dwarf holds, with armored trains traveling between them carrying supplies. It works a bit like the movie Snowpiercer, where the elites ride on these armored behemoths, using them to cross hostile terrain in an instant. Being able to lay down track and quickly cross the Badlands to defend these dwarf holds would make for a fun, tall faction, drawing on a similar system from Shogun 2's Fall of the Samurai DLC, which frankly is all very dwarf, but unlike their Dawi brethren, Chaos Dwarfs can be sorcerers. These demon smiths wield dark chaos magics, and the greatest of them become the sorcerer prophets. But this comes at a price, as dwarfs weren't designed to be wizards by the old gods. Chaos Dwarfs who play with themselves too much turn to stone from the feet up. This could be a stacking debuff that's applied every time a demon smith casts a spell in battle, and would help offset the firepower of the lore of Hashut and ensure they stay static and low speed. There's too many tabletop spells for them all to make it in, so here's a few choice picks. Ash Cloud. Call down a storm of hot ash to scald, blind, and slow your enemies. Eruption. One of several spells that make lava erupt from under an enemy's feet to slow and damage them. The Curse of Hashut. Channel the stone curse, petrifying your own body into the enemy, turning them to stone, which will let you spend those debuff charges and restore some movement speed back to your spellcaster. Because, if you're going to steal Yuri's plotline from Warcraft, you might as well take their battle mechanics as well. Lava Storm. Balls of molten lava rain out of the sky. And Magma Pool. The sorcerer melts into the ground, then reappears in another part of the battlefield. It's a teleport, and it would be the first of its kind in a Total War game. In application, it would be a summon spell that kills the original when the spell is complete, but retains its stats. This mobility would allow your petrified sorcerer to still move about and be effective even when they're completely petrified and technically have 0 move speed. Chaos Dwarfs are a slow faction that use firepower to bombard enemies, and these spell choices provide more damage options and slows to keep their enemy at a distance and keep them being pelted for longer. But who would lead these Chaos Dwarfs? Well, any legendary Lord mechanic or unit first has to pass the rule of cool. While several Chaos Dwarfs are named, few have enough lore, designs, and playstyles interesting enough to grab a player's attention. Astragoth Ironhand, though, is a certainty. The oldest living Chaos Dwarf sorcerer prophet, and the greatest wizard to walk the plains of Zarduk in 1,000 years. He's not going much of anywhere now, though, as the curse of petrification has almost fully overtaken his body. But that hasn't stopped him. He had his slaves build him a mech suit and now cruises around like Kenneth Branagh in Wild Wild West. His original mechanical mini left a bit to be desired, though, but fan brews have made Astragoth go full Gundam. At first glance, this oversized tin can seems a bit of a long shot, but the underlying skeleton and animations can be reused from Treemen and Negrifex Colossi, which would give you a monstrous armored spellcaster. He would be your magic faction, twisting and twirling the wind to Hashut's biddings, and as the big man of the Dawizar Empire, you could expect some administrative buffs as well. He also, notably, has beef with demonsmith Drazhoath the Ashen. Drazhoath is a late addition to Warhammer Fantasy and is a mighty sorcerer and able warrior who leads his war hosts from the front mounted upon the great Taurus, Cinderbreath, which is a lot of badassery to unpack in a single sentence. Few sorcerers in Hashut's service can match his knowledge in the creation of war machines and demon binding. But while Drazhoath is the lord of the Black Fortress, its location at the edge of the Chaos Dwarf Empire means he's always looking for a way back into the inner circle, and only a great victory could unseat Astragoth as the de facto leader of the Chaos Dwarfs. Drazhoath would be a mixed spellcaster and melee lord with a unique flying mount option, whose faction specializes in Chaos Dwarf warriors and dwarf war machines as befits the fires and foundries of the Black Fortress. Now those two are the shoe-in lords. The next ones I'm going to throw out are a bit more controversial. Shar'Tor the Executioner, a bull centaur lord. You may know him as a Forge World tabletop model for Age of Sigmar, but few have heard he was originally created for Warhammer Fantasy Battles and scrapped at the last minute due to the end times. Shar'Tor is a warrior priest of Hashut and serves as his faithful executioner, favored by the Dark God to inspire his bull centaur followers and chop down any in Hashut's way. Shar'Tor's faction would then buff monstrous bull cavalry, and he himself will be armored with armor piercing and fear or terror and fast moving. Well, or at least fast for a Chaos Dwarf. You liked Kolek Suneater and Tarox the Brass Bull, so welcome to your new favorite beatstick, Goros Warhoof, rebranded as a Chaos Dwarf. One lord in a race pack usually works against the others, but with the Chaos Dwarfs, he isn't a dwarf at all. Gorduz Backstabba is the Hobgoblin Khan. Hobgoblins are taller, leaner, and meaner than ordinary goblins, yet nowhere near as burly and brutal as orcs. Gorduz has so many scars on his back, it's basically armor, yet he's maintained his position as Hobgoblin chieftain through cunning, poisoned, and the unfortunate accidents of anyone around him too clever for their own good. When it comes to hobgoblins, think Mongolian horsemen, but with malicious green guys riding wolves. Gorduz has a long history with Cathay and could start outside the Darklands either as a foreign servant or his own boss. He could buff hobgoblin units with penalties for using any Chaos Dwarfs in your army and have poison attacks, speed bonuses, and a focus on skirmishing. Really, the antithesis of everyone else. To be fair, on the tabletop, Gortuz wasn't allowed to lead an army, but CA could spin it so the Hobgoblin Khanate is a vassal of the Chaos Dwarves, or possibly even his own separate lord, making it so his faction could be the only one with Hobgoblin generals and Hobgoblin hero units, with additional greenskin units pulled from other rosters. Are these four the only options? Of course not. For your generic lord that you can recruit in the campaign map, a lot of people want to divide it into having two, so you have a spellcaster and a melee hero. But this ignores one of the most interesting facets of Chaos Dwarf society, in that the sorcerer prophets rule everything. Everybody else is just there to serve them and the greater glory of Hashut. This would mean you'd have more options for hero choices for Chaos Dwarfs to fulfill those utility functions. And I feel like Bull Centaur hero, which would be a monstrous cavalry, a Demon Smith sorcerer hero, and an Infernal Castellan melee hero would fit each one of those bills accordingly. Hobgoblin Khans could also appear at this hero level if they have a diminished role in the DLC. Chaos Dwarf armies were a bit odd in their lore and tabletop, in that it was very few Chaos Dwarfs leading hordes of greenskins and siege weapons. The best way to visualize how the faction fits together is to put it into individual building trees to see how one unit would progress into the next and fit into the larger scheme. For melee infantry, there's the basic Chaos Dwarf Warrior, much like every other low-tier Dwarf Warrior, except in black. As you ascend through their tiers, they would get progressively more clothing and pointier hats. They would have interesting ranged options though, as they also can be equipped with shotguns, because when you're smart, you shop at S-Smart. Their topmost tier would be the Dwarven Immortals, named after the great legions of the Persian emperors. Though admittedly, this unit was never in the army book and only appeared in a Gotrek and Felix novel. In later editions of the Chaos Dwarves army, though, the Infernal Guard take front and center stage. Infernal Guards are what happens if a Chaos Dwarf shames himself. He will have an iron mask burned onto his face and will then serve in a suicide squad until he either dies or redeems himself, and then they rip the mask back off again, making them a bit less permanent than the Slayer's Oath, but just as deadly. Like regular Chaos Dwarfs, they have a blunderbuss variant called a hail shotgun in this case, but also have something called a fire glaive, which is basically the Kislev Streltsy in Chaos Dwarf form. And you may be wondering at this point why there are so many unofficial miniatures in this video. When the Chaos Dwarf army roster was brought back for the Throne of Chaos, nearly all of its models were Forge World exclusives, which means they were very expensive, very rare, and hard to find, so you didn't have a lot of people collecting them. Third-party companies have since stepped in to fill in the gaps. The final tier of Infernals would be the Ironsworn, the elite Chaos Dwarf warriors of the Infernal Guard that serve as bodyguards for the Sorcerer Prophets. Their black shard armor is forged not just from iron and fire, but also from the blood, souls, and other squiggly bits of chaos. For all these very heavy infantry, you can expect high armor and heavy shielding. Supporting these slow and heavy units will be cheap and expendable hobgoblins. From a modeling perspective, hobgoblins are enlarged noblars or goblins with slightly different faces and colorations. Hobgoblin cutthroats would come out on the bottom with a shields and bow version on the next tier above it, and then hobgoblin sneaky gits, stealthy, faster moving like noblar trappers and skaven gutter runners, and they'd have throwing knives to give them a bit of a ranged attack. For cavalry, Chaos Dwarfs will be very limited, with Hobgoblin Wolf Riders being standard light cavalry, and Hobgoblin Raiders, who are the same thing but with bows and arrows. There's not many options there because they're dwarfs, and speed happens to other factions. When it comes to monstrous units, though, there are so many Forge World miniatures to choose from that it's a bit bloated, so I tried to think of where skeletons and animations could be reused to cut costs. In the Servants of Hashut building, you have Bull Centaurs, who are the dwarfs that have grown with bull-like proportions, the Bull Centaur Renders, one step above them, with shield and dual weapon options, and finally the Bull Centaur Taruk, a big, single-entity guy with a great weapon. They'd work a bit like Dragon Ogres in the Warriors of Chaos roster and would probably share that animation. And finally, Chaos Siege Giants, where you add Chaos Dwarf armor to a giant, which sounds so obvious you wonder why no one else has done it. Probably because it costs too much steel to properly cover their private bits. But if that doesn't work, the Chaos Dwarfs always have a summonable option. Kadai are half demon and half raging fire, bound together by sacrifices to Hashut, and barely contained within armor and bronze magical armor. And they're all mindless agents of destruction, just like real fire. And it would be cool to see these guys as a summon for high-level Sorcerer Prophets. A higher tier of Kadai does exist, the Kadai Destroyer, which was never officially released, but a prototype was created. It's been described as a walking furnace roughly in the shape of a bull. Personally, I think it's very on brand and a wonderful thematic addition, but its role in the Chaos Dwarf army is at least partially taken. Great Taurus are huge and powerful monsters with the body of a massive bull and giant wings that hold them aloft like dragons. It burns with an inner fire so intense that anyone that gets near it is scorched alive, so it's no wonder the Chaos Dwarfs worship them as sacred to Hashut. Later editions gave it armor and called it a Baal Taurus and made it the official mount of the Sorcerer Prophets. There's even a third mythical version called the Lamassu, which is anti-magic and has its own spells, and is based on very real Mesopotamian deities. It has the body of a bull and wings like the others, but now includes the hideous face of a Chaos Dwarf and a big, long, bushy plated beard. While all of these would have high health pools and can fly, their actual effectiveness on the battlefield would be limited by small numbers and a lack of anti-air or ranged abilities. Taurus are one of the few things, though, that we can say are 100% confirmed as DLC, because if you look at the Cathayan ox that pulls their mortar, you'll notice it already has bones for the winged animations of the Great Taurus. The real bread and butter of the Chaos Dwarf army, though, are its war machines, many of which are already in the game. Hell Cannons already are part of the Warriors of Chaos roster, and it's a big bad demon cannon. And your eyes don't deceive you, those are Chaos Dwarfs manning it. They've actually been in the game since Warhammer 1. Magma Cannons are short-range flamethrowers that shoot liquid metal, and they're already in the regular Dwarf roster, so you can just paint it black and call it Chaos. Dreadquake Mortars are long-range, high-angle of fire trajectory cannons, which are why they're called mortars, so it's just a mortar, guys. Deathshrieker rocket launchers are Grand Cathay's Fire Rain rocket, except with a different name. And you'll notice here just how many of these ideas for war machines have been taken into other factions already. Why these in particular, though? Well, on the tabletop, every war machine listed could be mounted onto flat cars and pulled around by one of those Iron Demon trains I mentioned earlier. See, they're the actual crazy train Ozzy tried to warn us about. Iron Demons are straight out of a Mad Max movie. They're tons of rolling steel that don't even need tracks, manned by black leather-clad weirdos. So they've got to get in the game, but I can only think that the nightmare of animating one must keep developers awake at night. I mean, the easiest way of implementing them would be to give the Iron Demons two basic forms, one with a cannon like an Imperial Steam Tank, and a second Skullcracker form that's essentially a giant heavily armored chariot. The various attachment cars wouldn't exist in this version on the battlefield, though, and would instead be bound spells that you can call in like aerial bombardments. None of this is exactly earth-shattering, but it ticks the boxes of what people want from their demon trains. But I think we can be a bit more creative than this, so let's try the hard way. I mean, we could make a long train and give each section independent health pools like the mounts in Total War Troy, but that would make it a pathfinding nightmare, and setting it on a track that circles the battlefield would be lame as you couldn't run people over. So let's compromise. The basic Iron Demon engine still exists as a single large entity unit, but now it's upgraded on the campaign map through a Demonsmith Ironworks, similar to Ikit Claw's workshop mechanic. There's slots for upgrading siege engines and whatnot by spending demon souls, which lets you upgrade your machines to better versions. But the star of the show would be a tab to build your own hype train. Let's limit it to an engine plus one attachment, and then you can design it for your needs. A magma cannon for close work, or a hell cannon for mobile range. The main engine itself could even be customized. This idea of a fiery Build-A-Bear system plays well with the Demon Prince customization mechanic that was brought out for Warhammer 3. I mean, it's not a long black train with 18 cars of death rolling down the line, but it'll scratch that itch. And that's how I see the Chaos Dwarfs coming together. But what do you think? I mean, can you smell the hot iron and burning coal? Do you see them rolling across the Red Plains carrying an army of dark dwarfs ready to ruin anybody in range? So leave your thoughts below, and hopefully we'll see Total War's interpretation of them releasing soon. But until then, thanks for watching.